Sure thing. So today is the feast of St. Anselm of Canterbury, Bishop and a Doctor of the Church. So I thought we would begin with one of his prayers. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O my God, teach my heart where and how to seek you, where and how to find you. You are my God, and you are my all, and I have never seen you. You have made me and remade me. You have bestowed on me all the good things I possess. Still, I do not know you. I have not yet done that for which I was made. Teach me to seek you. I cannot seek you unless you teach me, or find you unless you show yourself to me. Let me seek you in my desire. Let me desire you in my seeking. Let me find you by loving you. Let me love you when I find you. Amen.
Amen.
Son of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. All right, Monica, you have the next 40 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. Then on this special topic, you're very hot to desire to share with us.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me. I might just tell you a little bit about myself and my role, just to sort of situate where I'm coming from in having a conversation about hot button issues. So my background is that I'm a lawyer by trade and training. So I studied law at university, worked as a lawyer for 10 years in Sydney and then ultimately in London. And then back in about, I think it was 2013, while I was living in London, I got a very strange email from somebody in the communications department at the Archdiocese that said, "Hi, we think you should move back to Sydney and come and work in communications for the church. We know that you don't have a communications background and we don't care. We think you should just come and quit your job, move back to Sydney and try to do media." And so I did, and moved back to Sydney at the end of 2013, began working with the Archdiocese at the beginning of 2014. It wasn't designed that way, but I spent most of my first couple of years doing the Royal Commission because that was going on at the time. So the Child Abuse Royal Commission. And so I spent a lot of time covering that and assisting with the church's media response to the Royal Commission. And then that wrapped up, I think, at the beginning of 2017. So February 2017, the Royal Commission wrapped up. And then the same-sex marriage debate started almost immediately. And so I got thrown into that and ended up being the communications director for the Coalition for Marriage, which you might remember was the official sort of no campaign for the plebiscite. And then that finished up at the end of 2017. And then we had, Cardinal Pell and the charges against him and the media response about that. We had a couple of euthanasia campaigns, the abortion debates in New South Wales, the Ruddock Review into religious freedom. And so my work ended up being thrown into the communications on all of these hot button issues. And then a couple of years ago, the Archbishop suggested that instead of looking at these from a communications perspective, that I would move into policy. So things like writing government submissions, dealing with MPs, and assisting sort of in the grassroots campaigning on all of the hot button issues. So everything from the abortion campaign to euthanasia, to religious freedom, the confessional seal, gender ideology, all of those things. So my job really is to be across all of, I don't like using the phrase the culture wars, but it's probably the best description that I can use. So being across all of that, advising the Archbishop and assisting on that end. And what I do is I see my role as it's my job to worry about these things and fight these things so that you can do your job of preaching Christ to the younger generations. So while I'm going to talk a fair bit today, a little bit doom and gloom about all of the things that are going on, the most important thing for all of you is that it's my job to worry about all of this stuff. That's what they pay me to do. But for you, I just want you to go and do what you do best, which is, just love these kids and teach them about Christ. And if I do my job well, it means that you can do that without having to worry about gender ideology or religious freedom or things like that. So that's me, and that's sort of how I'm coming to this conversation. So what I want to do is, the first part of this discussion, I just want to outline a few of the key issues that are currently on the table, either at a federal level or at a state level in New South Wales. I know that there are some people from other states joining us, so forgive me for being a little bit New South Wales centric, but it does have sort of similarities across all states. So I'm just going to outline a few of the key issues, where they're at in terms of the politics and the laws and things like that, and what we can expect to come in sort of the next year or two. And then after that, I want to give some really practical tips on how we speak about controversial issues to family and friends and others who might challenge us. I want to be very clear, this isn't for use in your classrooms. I know that CCD has a very strict controversial issues policy that you guys have to follow. And so I'm not trying to supplant that in any way, but I'm sure that, when you're at a dinner or when you're at a barbecue or something like that, and somebody asks you what you do, and you mention that you teach CCD, often you'll be challenged about the church's view on something or something else. And so what I want to do is hopefully give you some tools to equip you in having those conversations. I won't get into a lot of the specifics of the arguments sort of for or against some of these issues. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and you can raise specific issues with me. I know that there were some questions already coming in from last night. And then, so I just want to give you an overview of where we are at, and then some practical tips, and then we can get into specifics if you want. Okay, so 5 big issues coming up, either currently in play or coming ahead. And the first one I want to talk about briefly is euthanasia. So euthanasia is currently happening in Victoria. They said that they expected about a dozen people a year to be accessing euthanasia and assisted suicide in the first year in Victoria, and then settling into about 100, 150 a year, sort of when the program went going. In the first year alone, we had something like about 140 people take their own lives, which, if you compare that to other parts of the world, it took them almost 20 years to get to those types of numbers. So the Victorian legislation is being used and used quite broadly, and almost not a day goes by at the moment where you don't see lobbying in the paper to expand its scope even broader, whether it's people saying that doctors shouldn't have to see a patient in person and they should be able to sort of accept euthanasia via Zoom, whether it's that, the doctor who is treating the person or who was signing off on the euthanasia shouldn't have to specialise in the condition that they're suffering or things like that at every point.
Okay, so euthanasia is going sort of absolutely blaring in Victoria, and like I said, calls every day for it to be expanded. The law has passed in WA to allow euthanasia over there, and it hasn't begun yet. It's due to begin this year in July. So by July this year, we'll have a second state that is operating to allow people to access lethal drugs if they have a terminal illness. The law recently just passed in Tasmania as well, so that will be implemented probably sometime next year. And so by the end of next year, there'll be at least 3 states in Australia that have legalised euthanasia and assisted suicide. Obviously, as a church, we would say that this is against the dignity of the human person, that this isn't dying with dignity. Giving somebody a lethal injection isn't the best way to treat their illness. As Archbishop Fisher often says, it's not about putting grandma out of her misery, it's about putting her out of ours. Queensland will introduce legislation this year. Queensland is a little bit unique in that it only has 1 House of Parliament. So there's not a lower house and an upper house. So there's just the lower house in Queensland. And the government supports this bill. So that should go through probably with very little debate, as most people will just, without an upper house, there's often not a lot of opposition to even controversial bills. South Australia, similarly, will start debating euthanasia legislation from next month. And so there's a real likelihood that by the end of this year, we will have 5 out of the 6 states in Australia that have passed euthanasia legislation. For New South Wales, the independent MP Alex Greenwich, who orchestrated the abortion bill back in 2019, has indicated that he'll do the same here in New South Wales and introduce a euthanasia bill. Because it's not being introduced by the government, there's probably a better chance at opposing it. And in Sydney, I know that we will mount quite a significant campaign against it. But that debate is also coming to us here in New South Wales. So that's the picture of euthanasia across the country. My next topic, I'm just going to fly through these. The next few are all a little bit related. So I want to talk a little bit about religious freedom. So after the same-sex marriage debate, there was a national review. They called it the Ruddock Review into religious freedom, because there were concerns that after changing the definition of marriage to include same-sex couples, that would have a flow-on effect for people of faith and religious institutions. Not only the likes of Israel Folau, but also, individuals of faith, school teachers and others who, just because they express a view on marriage, suddenly found themselves disciplined. One of the more extraordinary cases was of this photographer over in Western Australia who was asked to photograph a same-sex couple, and he said, "Yep, look, no problem, I'll do it. Just so you know, though, I'm a Christian and I don't really believe in same-sex marriage. I'll do the photography, but just in case you want somebody else who actually agrees with you and the way you're living your lives, I want to give you that opportunity, and no offense will be taken." And they sued him for discrimination, and they were successful. And he had to put up an apology on his website. He had to pay a fine and all of those types of things. So it's not even about refusing service. He was just trying to be open and honest and give this couple the biggest choice that they had. Western Australia, again, there's a foster couple over there who's currently in court. They were looking to foster children between the ages of 0 and 5. And as part of the questionnaire, they had to answer, what happens if one of your children are same-sex, one of the children you foster says that they're same-sex attracted. And they said, well, we don't really think that that's going to be an issue for us, seeing as how we're only looking to foster children under the age of 5, but we're a Christian couple, and so we would raise them in the Christian faith. And they got denied the ability to be foster parents because that would create an unsafe environment for children. So it's not only about the, like I said, the Israel Folaus of the world, but also, your regular mum and dads who are just trying to live out their Christian faith in a world where the definition of marriage has changed. So there was a big national inquiry into religious freedom, made a number of recommendations, including that a law be passed at a federal level and in New South Wales that prevents discrimination against somebody on the basis of religious belief or activity. Those recommendations came through now going on about 3 years ago, and still that while there's been a couple of draft bills, nothing's been passed either at a federal level or at a state level. And the reason for that really is that any time any law is proposed that aims to offer protections for people of faith, there's strong opposition, really strong opposition. So much so that there's a fair bit of unequal treatment in the way that people of faith are treated, particularly in New South Wales. For those who don't know, it is perfectly legal. If you were to walk into a cafe to order a coffee and they knew that you were a Catholic, they could just say to you, well, sorry, we don't serve Catholics in here. And that would be completely fine. They could turn you away. You would have absolutely no recourse under anti-discrimination law. They turned you away because you're a woman, because of your ethnic background, because of your sexual orientation or gender identity, then that would be a problem, and discrimination law would protect you. But if they turned you away because of your faith, in New South Wales, there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. So these are big gaps in the law. In New South Wales, Mark Latham introduced a bill to try and address this. There was a parliamentary inquiry. There's been some debate, and still not much movement on it because the rights of people of faith aren't very appealing politically. No politician really wants to step up and go into bat for people of faith. So one of the big areas that comes into is gender ideology and gender fluidity. Some of you might have read in the paper over the last few days, there's been some debate about another bill that's before Parliament at the moment, and the idea behind that is trying to prevent gender ideology being taught in the classroom. And what I mean by gender ideology is the idea that people can change their gender, that gender is a spectrum. So not only can you change from male to female, but then there's a whole number of options in between that as well. And so the idea is that this legislation would go in to prevent that being taught in school as a biological fact or a scientific fact. And again, that's getting quite a bit of opposition. Talking about the laws is sometimes a little bit abstract. So I guess I want to give a quick example of how this might play out in an ordinary school. So if we don't stop the encroaching of gender ideology into schools, particularly into Catholic schools, these are the types of things that can happen. So now imagine you've got a hypothetical family. You know, Johnny's one of the kids. He's 6 years old. He goes to school and he plays with it. You know, he's got a bunch of friends. One of them's named Tommy. And Tommy decides that he's going to transition and socially transition and become a girl. So Johnny comes home to you and says, you know, Tommy's a girl now, and her name's Tamara. We learnt that at school, and so now we all have to call her Tamara, and you know, she wears a dress and all of those things. And Johnny says to you, Mum, can boys really be girls? You've got a 6-year-old in front of you, you're a Catholic, you want to teach them sort of the truth about gender, and all of a sudden, because the school has accepted this transition of this student, you're now in a position where you have to make a decision about what you say to your child. So, you know, say you say, well, you know, no, boys can't really be girls, and you know, Tommy's just going through a phase. Remember, you know, at book week you dressed up as a lion and you could roar really loud and all of those things. Didn't make you a lion, but that's just, you know, it's just a bit of pretend. That's okay. You have to still be really nice to Tommy, you know, still invite him over, all of those things, but no, boys can't be girls. Then you get a call from the school, and the school says, well, we've got to talk to you because Johnny's saying that boys can't be girls, and that's a form of bullying, and we're going to have to get him into trouble if he keeps saying that boys can't be girls. You know, just like, well, but that's the truth, and I'm going to teach my child, you know, the faith, the morals, the belief system that I want them to grow up in. And the school says, well, we need to protect Tommy, Tamara against some bullying. And so you're going to have to insist to Johnny that no, boys can be girls and that's fine, because otherwise the school gets into trouble. So no one wants to discriminate against children who are experiencing gender dysphoria, absolutely not. But you start getting into a conversation, pushing parents into conversations about gender and about changing gender with their kids that maybe they're not ready for. So that's one of the big issues when it comes to the gender ideology in the classroom. The other, you know, there's also things like school camps and sporting teams, school uniforms, and all of those things where the change doesn't just affect the child involved, who no doubt is struggling and suffering with gender dysphoria is a really real thing. But it also affects the way in which a lot of this stuff is presented in the classroom, and the decisions that will ultimately and primarily up to parents now being taken out of their hands. And I think that in terms of gender ideology, that's a real risk. It's about taking away the rights of parents and the authority of parents, particularly in matters of morals, and putting them in the hands of the state. I don't know if that makes sense, but if not, we can hit it in Q&A. I might leave the controversial issues there. There are, a bunch of others, whether it's the confessional seal, whether it's COVID vaccines, conversion therapy, all of those things, but I won't bore you too much with all of that. What I really want to do is talk about how we have these conversations with other people. So I guess I've got 5 tips for preparing before having these types of conversations, and then 5 tips for when you're in the moment. The first one that I'll say is you need to be prepared. So you need to do some research, do some reading, particularly of the news. Often we can get tempted or fall into the trap of just reading information from one news outlet, reading the headlines, Facebook or other types of news services sort of curate our news information. If you see something, a headline or a story that's important, that confuses you a little bit, whether or not it's about a controversial issue, often whether or not it's about something the Pope said. Often we hear about what the Pope says through secular media, and sometimes they tend to put their own spin on it. I would suggest do your reading so that you've read a few different news sources. Try to go back to primary sources if you can, just so you know what's going on. You have a fuller picture and don't just rely on the one source. Part of preparation also is to listen to how other people speak about a particular issue. I'll often say, particularly to seminarians and to priests, listen to how Archbishop Anthony speaks about a particularly controversial issue. He's always very measured in what he says. He's always very, I find him very, very good on a lot of these issues. So often listening to how other people approach an issue. Father Mike Schmitz, for those of you who are followers of Father Mike Schmitz on social media, he's great on a lot of these controversial issues as well. Find your favourite, find someone whose tone and whose approach to these issues you quite like. I know a lot of people like Bishop Robert Barron and others, and just if you sort of embed yourself a little bit in their language and the way they speak about things, often you can find that these conversations then happen a lot easier. So that's number one, be prepared by doing your research and listening to others. Number 2, which probably should have been number 1, pray before a conversation, during a conversation, and when you're finished having the conversation. So if you know that a controversial issue is going to come up, I always ask the Holy Spirit for guidance, and also I always ask my guardian angel to go and greet the guardian angel of the person that I'm speaking to, so that they can and sort of get them on side and hopefully pave the way. When you're in a conversation and somebody's asked you something that's a little bit unexpected, or you want to make sure that you're speaking truth, just internally call on the Holy Spirit to guide you through these conversations. And then even if you think you've completely tanked the conversation, a good Dominican sister said to me, after the conversation's over, you just pray like, Lord, can you bring some good out of the mess that I just made of that moment? That's tip 2, pray the whole time. Number 3 is trust that you have something good to say on these issues, and that you can't mess it up that badly. Right? So have a little bit of trust that the person that you're speaking to actually needs to hear this information, that it's good, that the church's view on a lot of this stuff is good. It's for the flourishing of humans. It's not about saying no. It's about having people live their life to the full, about their protection, about their good, and about the good of society. So trust that you actually do have something good and valuable to say in these situations. Number 4 is you don't have to attend every fight that you're invited to. Often people will bait you, not because they're actually interested in what you have to say, not because they're interested in what the church teaches on something, but simply because they want to get under your skin and have a little bit of fun. Sometimes it's hard to pick which one of these categories people fall into. So always start with charity and start answering as you would someone who is actually engaged. But then you can often tell partway through a conversation whether or not you're actually making any ground, whether or not the person's heart is at least a little bit open to hearing what you have to say, or whether it's just completely closed and they just want to use you as a punching bag for their own hurts, their own opposition to the church, or something like that. In those cases, you don't have to use all of your energy. It's hard. It's hard, I know, because a lot of people think, no, you know, we need to speak the truth to everyone, and nobody is beyond hope, and nobody's a lost cause, and everybody, you know, we should be speaking and giving our time to everyone. Yes, you can treat somebody with love, but you don't necessarily have to convince someone something that they just refuse to hear or even be rational about. So you don't have to, you don't have to attend every fight you're invited to. And my final tip, which is somewhat related, social media is usually not the place to have these conversations. So if somebody posts something on social media, if you post something controversial on social media, getting into a debate often isn't Facebook, Twitter, whatever your social media app of choice is. It's often not the best place to have these conversations because of the distance between the two. These are always conversations better to have one-on-one, in person, or on a private chat. If you do engage in any of this on social media, one of the things that I will suggest, that one of the key things I will say is remember that other people are watching. So it's not just a conversation between you and the person that you're debating or engaging with, but it's about everybody else who can see that conversation as well. And often, when I said at the beginning, you can learn from other people and how they approach a controversial topic. People will learn from you. So sometimes I'll get into a little bit of a social media debate, not because I necessarily want to argue or debate the person who's put up a controversial post or something like that, but because I know other people are watching. And if I think that I have something to offer those who would never engage themselves, but who want to see how somebody might deal with a controversial situation, social media can be a tool for that, but use sparingly, because for the most part, it's not the appropriate place. So that's my 5 tips for actually being prepared for a conversation. Now when you're in one, so I have to say I honed a lot of my debate techniques over Friday night drinks when I was a lawyer, because you'd sit around for drinks on a Friday night and somebody would inevitably ask you a question about the church's teaching on whether it was marriage or contraception or abortion or whatever it was. And so you come to the end of a long week, but you have an audience of people who are non-Catholics or lapsed Catholics who want to get into a bit of a debate. So these are, I guess I would say, my tried and true methods for talking to somebody about controversial issues. The first thing I would say is keep your answers short, simple, and true. Often we tend to think the more that we talk, the greater the ability for us to explain things, but that's not usually the case. If somebody asks you a question, give the shortest, truthful answer that you can give, because it then encourages them to open up a little bit more, ask more questions, and hopefully lead you into understanding where they're coming from. So keep your answers short, simple, and true. The second aspect of that is ask questions of the person who is firing questions at you, again, to try and understand where they're coming from, and also to expose a little bit of the logic in their thinking. I'll give you an example. Talking about abortion, so people will say, oh, well, you know, abortion can be, you know, if you're against abortion, then, you know, in all circumstances, then that's really wrong, right? There should be, up to a point, abortion should be allowed. And so then I would just say, okay, what's that point? If it, you know, what if the woman's 38 weeks pregnant? Is that right? Should abortion be allowed then? And often people will say, no, that's too late. And so then you wind them back a little bit. Okay, at what point is abortion okay? And ask them to draw the line for you, and then invite them to consider how, you know, if they say, okay, up to 14 weeks is fine. And so you say to them, okay, well, what's the difference between a child at 13 weeks and 5 days and a child at 14 weeks and 1 day? And so encourage them to think about the logic that they're using in answering those questions. I often find that asking them questions and trying to get them to justify their position assists. It also means that you're not constantly the one defending and constantly the one being having questions fired at them. The next tip, and this is probably the most important one, I would think, is make it personal. Use personal stories of your own experience, and also make it personal to the people that you're speaking to. Again, if I can give an example. So we hear a lot about the seal of confession and you know, laws that come in that are attempting to force priests to break the seal of confession when certain things related to child-related harm are confessed in the confessional. And there are, in every state pretty much except New South Wales, there are laws that would require a priest to break the seal of confession in those circumstances. And people will often try to debate this on the idea of, you know, child protection and all of those things. And it can be a little bit hard to get into a debate at that level. So often I'll say something like, well, because I'll say, you know, people shouldn't be able to go to confession and hide what they've done, and it shouldn't be a place of secrecy, so that, you know, they can come in and confess and then, you know, and be assured of secrecy, right? And so instead of trying to debate at that level, I'll often make the story personal, and I'll say, well, look, I can't talk about other people's experience of confession, but I'll tell you about my own experience. Confession isn't a place where I go to hide. Quite the opposite. When I go to confession, I'm being honest and I'm opening up, and I'm taking responsibility for the bad things I've done and not blaming anybody else, and not trying to explain away or minimize my guilt, right? Confession is the one place I go to completely own up. And if I didn't go to confession, then I would be a worse person. Confession calls me to be a better person. It gives me the graces to be a better person, but even if the person you're talking to doesn't believe in sacramental grace, the idea that you regularly go somewhere to be honest about your sin and your flaws, it can only be a positive thing. And so all of a sudden you've taken the conversation away from, you know, the law and the rights and wrongs, and you make it personal. So this is my personal experience of this. For abortion is another one. I'll often tell the story of this 14-year-old girl I know who fell pregnant, and she was living in a women's shelter. And they said to her, well, if you choose to have the baby, then you can't stay here because this is a women's shelter and not a family shelter. So we'll book you in for an abortion, and then you can keep your spot in the women's shelter. Otherwise, we'll have to evict you. And again, I'll just say, look, for whatever your views, the availability of abortion ended up limiting that girl's choices that day. So if you can make it personal, use your own personal experience. It's very, very hard for people to argue with your personal experience because it's your story, right? And also make it personal for them, right? So instead of debating something at a high level, you can, say, well, think about your own situation. I'll use euthanasia as an example. What would you want for your parent? What would you want for yourself in this situation? Would you want a society where the best end-of-life care is available, where palliative care beds are available if they're needed, where good medication, good doctors are available? Or do you want a society that says, well, actually, we're not going to invest so much in those things, and instead we're just going to offer lethal drugs? So take it out of the theoretical and make it personal. So that's tip 3. 2 more. 1, don't get locked into a binary choice. Often people will say, often people will try to give the most extreme position and present that as the church's position. Sorry, I'm going to use abortion again just because it's a really easy example to illustrate. People will say something like, well, you're anti-abortion. That means that, you know, say a university student gets pregnant, the boyfriend leaves, she doesn't have a job or a very good job, so you would prefer that she has the baby, isn't able to keep her job because she's got to look after the baby, isn't able to continue her university studies, and so just has to raise this child on her own, and with no education and no job, right? I'll say that's what you would prefer because you're anti-abortion. And so often they'll push you into sort of this is your view of the world. But the way you respond to things like that is by saying, actually, no, this is what the Catholic world, like this is what the Catholic worldview would look like. It's that, you know, ideally the woman would be married when she's having a child, when she's falling pregnant. But if not, that, you know, at least that the boyfriend would stick around and raise the child, because we think that, you know, mothers and fathers should raise children together. And then if he was to leave, that then the community would be there to gather around her, to help her financially, materially, you know, emotionally, all of those things, to give her the support she requires to raise that child. And then if the community is not there, that the state has the ability to step in and give her the assistance that she needs. So that actually you're not looking for the woman to be alone and on her own, but you want to build a society where not only children, but women and families are protected and loved and supported. So don't get thrown into an either or choice. There's always a third way. The Catholic Church offers a third way. And it's often good to speak about that. And the final one is practice makes perfect. We're all going to stuff it up. We're all going to say things that we wish we hadn't. We're all going to get into those arguments or those debates where you just think, oh, it would have just been better if I had shut my mouth. And we can be a little bit tempted then just to go, nope, I messed it up last time. I'm not going to try again. So I would just say, keep trying. Go back to your research, listen to people that you think do it better or do it well. Get advice from friends. I've got this wonderful priest friend who every time I mess up a conversation, I give him a call and he gives me some tips on how I could have handled it better. Just keep trying. The world needs witnesses. It needs truth more than ever today. The world needs truth and needs people who believe that truth is important and that it's objective. So keep trying and know that you're not alone. In all of the battles that come, there's always an army of people who are ready to stand beside you, with you, in all of this. So yeah, as hard as some of these challenges might be, you are absolutely not alone. That's all I have. So I said I'd leave about 15 or 20 minutes for questions, and that's where we're at, Anita. So I'm going to stop there and let you take over.
Awesome. Oh my goodness, so much. Thank you so much for the tip. That's really helpful, because like I got caught the other day with my doctor and he said to me, Anita, my mom's really suffering. She got dementia. And I know you're Catholic, Anita. What do you think about euthanasia? And I said, like, well, that's life. And I was like, oh, what else do I say? He's a doctor, right? He's a doctor himself. And he said, like, I can't stand seeing my mom suffering. So that's the argument. And, I got to be brave for next time. Keep trying, like he said, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things in that, it's like, well, where's the investment in dementia care and dementia research and palliative care and all of those things? One of the things that I often like to say is that the end of life inquiry in Victoria had something like 40 recommendations to do with the improvement of palliative care and only one about euthanasia. And the government introduced euthanasia and didn't put any money into palliative care to implement those recommendations. So you would, in those conversations, I would say, well, don't you think that society would be better if we invested more in dementia research, in care for dementia patients, rather than just lethal drugs and that's it? So that's sort of where I would sit it again, making it personal and giving a view of a better society, rather than, oh, well, do you want my mother to suffer or give her lethal drugs? It's like, well, actually, no, I want a society where she doesn't have to suffer because she gets the very best care.
Definitely, yeah, that's so true. And then again, we sometimes as a Catholic need to make more noise, isn't it, in terms of, like if there is people saying, oh, we're going to say no, even when you have that time about the yes and no voting, we keep silent, and that was the mistake, that we don't make enough noise as a Catholic, that we don't agree to that, All right, there's a couple of questions that come on the things. Where is that the one? Something about the gender. How do we answer a question about the gender ideology in the classroom? I would say from CCD perspective, we just said like odds love everybody, and we don't go into the conversation because that's going to be tricky, because we do have students that in transition in some of my classes. And sometimes the dangers in the classroom is the classroom teacher are listening, and we're not teaching about the gender issue. We are teaching about to love Jesus, correct? So I guess that's from my point. What do you think, Monica?
Yeah, look, I think that's right. Again, CCD, you don't want to do things that are going to threaten the ability of CCD to be in the classroom, and there are undoubtedly people there who are watching, who want to find fault with what you're doing and what you're saying, to use it against you as a reason to get CCD out of the classroom. You would know better than I would that sort of every, at least every year, what is it, the Parents for Rights in Schools or something like that, launch their campaign to get CCD out. So look at, it would, look, if it came up, I think you're right. I think it's just, we love everybody. We accept everybody. If I'm trying to explain the Catholic teaching, I would say, look, we believe that a person is a unity of body and soul, right? That those things aren't in opposition to each other, that your body isn't in opposition to your soul, that the church believes that, you're created as a being with a unity of body and soul. Again, short, simple, true, and leave it at that. But like I said, this is not CCD classroom policy. Absolutely. Do you want me to run through the questions? I can see them on my screen, Anita. Or
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm just trying to see which one did you think. Something about Tommy.
Yeah, so sorry, that was my example of Tommy in the classroom. Yep, look, there have been issues of Tommies in Catholic schools and in other schools. The Catholic schools do have policies on gender, on sort of gender transition and things like that. As I understand it, it's up to each sort of Catholic schools office to come up with their own policy. But yes, it's treated at the moment on a little bit of a case-by-case basis. Again, what I would say is that you would probably hope that a child transitioning isn't the first conversation that these families have with the school, that there's a good enough relationship that the school is aware of issues and leading up to this type of request, and not just somebody walking in and saying, okay, well now as of next term Tommy wants to be Tamara.
That's good. And we want to move on to the question that we got last night about the climate change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question last night was about dealing with climate change and people who look at climate change almost as a religion in and of itself, and want the government to do more and want bishops to do more on climate change, and how do we respond to that? I've got a couple of thoughts on that. The first I would say is that I think that the climate change debate actually exposes a little bit about how science can be used for ideology. So, you know, you'll have scientists that say, you know, there's no such thing as man-made climate change. Others who will go the other way and say climate change is real and it's completely, you know, the fault of humans and everything like that. And unless we're, you know, climate scientists ourselves, which I presume none of us are, it's hard to know which of those is accurate. And so what I think that it exposes is that sometimes, you know, science can be used to push an opinion, which we're not really used to, right? We're used to people saying, well, no, that's what religion does. Like, religion is used to push a particular worldview. But when you try to use science and things that should be objective, like weather patterns and things like that, and use it to push a particular worldview, that's where we get into a little bit of danger. How I would respond to it is I would say, look, you know, as Catholics, we're stewards of creation. And so we should do our best to look after creation. But the problem arises when we look at, we don't include humans in that creation, and we sort of look at the world and say, well, it's humans that are the problem. And if only we had fewer children, if only sort of, you know, humans were restricted in a number of ways, then that, you know, that means that equals care for creation. But humanity is part of the creation for which we must care and which we're called to care. And what makes it difficult is often the people who are, you know, so gung-ho about climate change are also the ones who are saying you shouldn't have children, or you shouldn't have any more than 2 children, or, you know, anything like that, because we need to protect the climate and the environment. But that's not the proper care for creation. We need to remain open to life. And so I think we can do both. We can be good stewards of creation while also not suggesting that humanity is somehow a curse on that creation rather than the crown of creation, which is what Scripture tells us.
All right, good one. Thank you. What about this, the seal of confession? Do you want to talk about that again?
Yep. So what's the position in New South Wales with priest and confessional seal? So New South Wales, at the moment, the seal of confession is still protected. So there's no obligation on a priest who hears either an allegation of a confession of child abuse or a disclosure of child abuse. So if you've got a person who comes in and confesses to child abuse in the confessional, or a child who comes in and discloses that they're being abused, most other states requires the priest to go to police. In New South Wales, that's not the case. And the confessional seal is still maintained. Does that mean that you can't, that the priest does nothing? No, absolutely not. We heard in WA, in their parliamentary inquiry, a number of abuse victims who said that actually the confessional was the first place where they went, where they felt safe to tell someone about their abuse. And then that assisted them in speaking about it to others. Even the Royal Commission said that there should be places where victims can go, where they feel secure that they can speak about their abuse confidentially. And the confessional provides that. And so the priest would obviously encourage them to speak to somebody outside, assist them in, you know, going to the police to make a report or other things like that, and give them that counsel to do that. But at first they can only do that if they're in a position of trust, where the person feels free to speak, in the security that if they don't want to go further, they don't have to. And so priests get tips on what to do, absolutely, if somebody comes in and either confesses or discloses abuse, and how to encourage that person to take that further.
All right, that's good to know. Religious freedom. I work in a Catholic. Which one is that one?
So you work in a Catholic hospital. It's difficult. Catholic hospitals should not be involved in activities that are contrary to Catholic teaching. So in this, I'm thinking about it, things like gender reassignment, hormonal treatment, IVF, abortion, all of those things. So look, if you are concerned about something that's happening that you don't think should be, drop me an email and I'll see, and I can take it on confidentially and take a look into what's happening. What are your rights about not participating in things? So for abortion, for euthanasia, there are fairly solid conscience rights when it comes to no participation. Abortion, I think there's a requirement to refer, but other than that, the individual doctor has rights. For other things like IVF, like gender treatment and those types of things, the law isn't specific about it, and it comes under the medical professionals, the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Authority, their code of conduct. And I think that they talk about conscience rights in the sense of you can exercise your conscience provided that the patient gets the relevant care, so that if you don't want to do it as a matter of conscience, that the patient still gets care. So it's a little bit, and by care I mean the treatment that they desire. So often it's an employment and sort of professional regulatory issue rather than a legal issue. And there are doctors who have struggled and suffered because they've objected to something where their employer wants them to participate. So it's a tough area. Part of the push for this type of religious freedom legislation is to make that easier. But if you're in that situation and something happens and some disciplinary action is taken or threatened, again, there are lots of people around who can back you, who will back you professionally, legally, from the media, all of those types of things. So reach out. If you don't know who to contact, call me, and I can connect you with people who can assist in that, because we're all in this together, and there are people who fight on behalf of doctors and others who are caught in these situations of conscience.
One more is about something about are Catholics allowed to turn off life-saving equipment?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So you can. The Church's teaching is that people are required to have regular, ordinary treatment at the end of their life, which usually is food and water, right? But there's no, and so you don't really have the right to take away food and water unless that in itself becomes burdensome. There are some conditions where actually putting in sort of intravenous hydration causes great pain to the person at the end of their life. But if it doesn't, you keep somebody on food and water. For things like that keep the heart going artificially or the lungs going artificially or anything like that, yes, Catholics are allowed to turn off that treatment at the end of life. And that's not euthanasia, that's just people are only required to keep ordinary treatment, not extraordinary measures that keep somebody alive artificially. Someone was talking about a brother who suffers from dementia and the wife looks after and getting better. I've just got your phone number there, not your name, but I just want to say they're the types of stories that we should be telling. And so again, if you're challenged on euthanasia, you wouldn't start with, here's the Church's position and here's the law and all of these things. Again, personal experience and the difference that's made to your family to have your brother being cared for by his wife in those circumstances. And then, yeah, again, there's another one on those.
Does the Catholic Church have guidelines on the end of life planning issues?
Yeah, there are plenty of them. So the Vatican Dignitas Personae, I think, is probably the most recent. But the Vatican's always putting them out. Evangelium Vitae is a great one. Archbishop Fisher what he says on euthanasia is often great. There are also, for those who have sort of forms about decision making at the end of life, so you can put in, they're called sort of enduring guardian forms, that where you nominate somebody to make decisions about your medical treatment if you can't make decisions for yourself. So for those forms, there's often there's sort of standard wording that you can put in those as well that requires those making decisions about your end of life to do it in alignment with Catholic teaching. I can provide that. I can provide that wording if anyone wants it. I always encourage people in their end of life documents to put that stuff in.
Right, Monica, it is 11:30.
Okay, can I answer just very quickly is suicide a sin always one? Because I think that's really important.
Oh, yep.
A sin requires full knowledge and full capacity to consent, right, to the action that you're doing. And often suicide comes at a time when the person isn't free because of some underlying mental health condition. Mm-hmm. So they don't have the ability to fully consent or to fully choose what they're doing because their decision is impaired. So not always a sin, and we always, as a church, we always have hope. We always have hope in God, in his mercy. And so for anyone who has lost somebody to suicide, just remember hope. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. There's so much, guys. All right. Well, like I said, any question, you guys can email it to me, then I can pass it to Monica, and any resources that Monica think will be good, I'll pass it to you guys as well. Okay. So again, thank you so much, Monica. You're amazing. We want you back for sure. All right, let's finish off with a closing prayer.
Sure. Let's all just pray, glory be. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Father, Son.